Bienvenue, welcome once again to another property-based podcast. Normally in this slot would be Property Matters Live, but today we have a special one. We've got some great luminaries of the industry. Michelle Card, Construction Alchemy, who single-handedly fights the good fight for constructors around the UK, specifically contractors. Dave Simonson of Deborah, thank you very much for returning. Of course, Hamish McClare, such a convey. Today's topic, which I just read, I should remember, late and costly, lurking dangers in any delay. I can't imagine that ever happening. Of course, to start us off, of course, Hamish McClare.
Well, in my line of the work, which actually contributes at various parts, isn't necessarily as damaging, but we do know that any work carried out by the planning inspectorate can actually cause some kind of mayhem in what's actually sort of going on within any construction which is going on anywhere, any projects which come up. The planning people sort of get involved, and it can impact. If we do have any challenges with the councils at all, there will be delays. They get fewer and fewer staff. However, it's not as dramatic as our two experts, our two professionals will actually sort of be able to tell us about today, because they're both of them. They get out there on the sites where all of these things are happening. I don't. I sit in my lowly office, sat here under the trees, watching these poor souls out there with their hard hats on and their sort of wondrous bright yellow jackets as they wander around the sites. So we ought to pass over we know what Michelle's like, very much so in terms of her demands of what goes on in these sites. And if she can keep the stuff shifting, she jolly well will.
Well, Michelle, delays, what are they? So it never happens, does it?
I thought I was supposed to leave my sarcasm behind.
Right. Okay. No, delays are just a consequence of normal working conditions, aren't they?
No, they're not. They're always expected in construction. And in all honesty, people like me, contractors, subcontractors, people on site are the ones that get the blame. But actually, the focus, in my opinion and my experience, is never actually, it's not normally the contractor's faults. Don't get me wrong. Especially when it comes to joinery, they're my least favourite because they're so specific and everything's bespoke. And unless you get your material order in 6 months in advance, then that's going to become a delay. But primarily, that is down to, a lot of the time, the delays are actually down to the employer. And the reason for those delays is because the information isn't given in time. Now, things take time in construction, especially when you're getting materials from all over the world, which is very, very common. Timber comes from all over the world. Metals come from all over the world. Especially anyone that's worked in any high-end resi especially knows that the whole of Italy and most of Europe shuts down in August. And if you haven't got your order in by May or June, you just aren't going to get anything until October, which obviously will cause delays. But a lot of the time, and I really get quite shoppy with my clients and people I'm working with, whether that be developers or funders or people building their houses themselves, is making sure that you get all the information right. And so many people rush to get it started because they think the sooner they start a project, the quicker it will finish. And it's totally wrong. The better you start the project. And if you delay, sometimes it can be 2 weeks, could be a month, but whatever you delay in the front end to get things right, if you get things right, you will save yourself weeks and months at the back end. And that is the biggest problem, is not doing all the information, the design and the pre-qualification stuff and the pre-contract stuff before you step foot on site. That is my opinion where the biggest delays come from.
So, Dave, apparently, according to Michelle, if you get your ducks in a row up front, everything goes swimmingly.
Very rarely, but in a market where there is many things going against you, it's never been more important that you plan meticulously and you mitigate the risks, working right from the very end to whatever your exit is, all the way through to, as Michelle alludes to, making sure you've got all your ducks lined up in a row from the outset. A lot of it down to various different challenges at different levels, whether it might be planning issues, whether it might be that the developer doesn't want to spend some extra money in getting the design done early to instructing everyone accordingly. The the level of detail required to ensure that the project is delivered successfully has never been more extreme than what it is now. So you have to mitigate all the risks, plan it out meticulously from what your exit strategy is going to be, and right from the beginning before you set on site. And if you're having funding, which more often than not people do require funding, every single day the money is drawn down, you're incurring interest. So even more reason to make sure you do the job properly right from the outset. But it does take meticulous planning. It does require all the professional team and everyone involved to be very much engaged in that process. And from what I see, more often than not late in the day. If everyone was pulled together right from the very beginning, even involving estate agents from a point of view of design and ultimately what's going to sell, but all the professionals should be involved in a room before anything starts. But more often than not, it's a panic and a rush to get on site.
And are we talking about all of the builders, including the so-called master builders? All of them seem to suffer from these same problems.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's like in any profession, you have extremes. You have those that are, generally speaking, more competent than others, including the professional team, and therefore they would generally experience less cost and time overruns. And you have the other extreme where people maybe not so competent. So it does vary, like in any profession. But I think if you're mitigating the risk and applying prudent contingencies, whether it be cost and time, that is obviously vitally important. But you've got to plan it all out very, very detailed, and make sure everything is done, to the best of everyone's ability.
Michelle, I know that materials have changed and standards have increased over time. I know, obviously, cladding matter, we talk about fire risks caused by that sort of thing. But surely the same has always applied. If you prepare correctly, then theoretically things should run to time.
Doesn't quite work like that in construction. And as Dave said, yeah, you can get, obviously, I think planning needs to be done in front. And I think some of the delays that we experience in the industry could have been prevented if the proper planning had gone up front. But things always happen. Somebody declares a war, all of a sudden you're not going to get materials in and out of somewhere. Something else happens, and all of a sudden the cost of timber goes through the roof. Something else happens, and there's a natural disaster somewhere, and there are no materials anywhere, and prices go up, down, left, right, whatever it may be. Well, things always go up. They very rarely go down. Things happen. All of a sudden you're digging. I've had projects where they've tried to dig out a basement, a piece of concrete, and they found an entire horse. All of a sudden the whole site gets shut down. Everyone's running because they don't know if there's an anthrax problem, or you could find an unexploded bomb. You can do, don't get me wrong, we have better technology now and can do surveys to try and find these things. But ultimately you find something that is 100 or so years old and the whole project stops. That's not something that you can necessarily plan for. You can do all the surveys that you like, but if you've got concrete and you've got a meter's worth of concrete or something, or bigger than that, and then all of a sudden you get through that and you find something underneath it, the technology doesn't go down to the core. There's always things that happen and things don't necessarily work out. You're dealing with materials that don't bend, for example, and if something, again, if you're dealing with incompetency, or you've got people aren't aligning the different materials and how they fit together, and you've got different tolerances. You can have a plus 25 mil tolerance on one product, but you may only have a plus 2 mil tolerance on another. And unless you get all of those integrations designed properly, there's so many things that can cause issues. But the key thing, like I think Dave touched on, one, obviously, is getting the right professionals is paramount. But two, getting those professionals managed properly, getting them communicated properly, get them driven to the same goal, keeping them motivated. Some of the projects I work on takes 2 or 3 years before we even start looking at the ground, just in the planning and the pre-planning and the designing stage. Other projects you can have up and from the concept to handing over can be 12 months or less. So it obviously depends, and the complexities, and some people do a rinse and repeat. Sometimes you're using new technology. There's so many variables in the construction industry. You can literally build 3 houses down the same road. They could be next to each other, and the ground conditions can be slightly different from one to another, depending on where a river goes underneath the ground, or water tables, or I don't know, one place that you expect it to be clear, and then all of a sudden there's a whole load of sand somewhere. Like at the moment, I've got a project up in St Helens, and we're having to do additional boreholes because they now think that there might be a mine underneath it, which no one's ever heard about and would have been closed hundreds of years go. So there are always things that come up that can't be, you can't always know absolutely everything, and then let alone throw some client changes in the mix that change their mind halfway through the progress, which the project, which happens all the time, because all of a sudden they see something they like, something new comes out, and then the whole thing changes. So a lot of it is communication. Obviously you guys know that I'm always barking on about contracts, aligning expectations, making sure everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, but also what's expected of them, keeping everyone on track, but also communicating. And it's frustrating when you're sitting in meetings all day, you don't get any work done, but ultimately without those meetings and making sure everyone's aligned, then you're destined for failure.
Hamish, I believe that, I mean, we talk a lot in cladding matters, but we've started talking about what happens when you take the cladding off. You see what's happened underneath. And even the top builders seem to suffer from these same problems of just shoving it all together at the last minute because they haven't bargained for the amount of time and the effort and the energy required to make the project complete.
Well, we're almost speaking about a different story there. However, it is the case. A very interesting time I spent in automotive, and because of the work that I was doing, working largely with one of the particular sort of companies I worked for, largely with the automotive components for Rover Group cars, we did a tremendous amount of work together with Honda. Now, it was fascinating looking to see how Honda operated. Honda owned every single company that was contributing to the project. So you would have the design engineers, you would have the manufacturers, you would have absolutely everybody concerned. And what they would do, they would take a drawing and they would sign that drawing within the meeting to match up okay, we're speaking about much tighter tolerances in automotive, but you would have everybody was direct. You'd have the quality engineers. You'd have everybody there that was important to the whole sort of manufacturing process. And it was quite interesting comparing that kind of meeting that they had with the kinds of meetings I went into with Rover Group, where you had really this people from all over the place. Somebody manufactured a motor, which was meant to go into a mini tank, for example, and it's never had a motor in it before. How do you manufacture those tolerances? It couldn't be done. It took us 18 months to build a proper sort of mini tank. And if that was the construction industry is anything to go by, we've got all of these, if you like, different sort of areas who are contributing to do it. But I think one of the most serious things must be, particularly from where Dave sits, because he's very often setting up bridging finance. So he's hopefully setting it up for the time of that particular construction. So any of these delays and things like that can have almost a mortal impact on what's actually sort of going on in the project.
Dave, what do you have to say on that score?
Yeah, I mean, well, what Hamish was saying there was really echoing what Michelle had said about making sure that you've got a really good project manager, making sure that everybody within the design team is overseen. But what I'm seeing from a funding point of view is obviously we've got this additional challenge that we haven't had for a while, which is the properties aren't selling as quickly as they have been previously. So generally speaking, in an upward market, if you've had some cost and time overruns, you would probably end up making the same profit, but you'd sort of forget about the fact you've had cost and time overruns. In a market that's more stagnant and your properties aren't selling, those cost and time overruns become a lot more prevalent. So I think it goes back to making sure that the project is de-risked. Obviously, lenders generally speaking, have plenty of liquidity, but in order to get a deal closed and therefore they're starting on site, the lenders understandably are being a lot more robust and ensuring that the site is ready to start, making sure that the pre-commencement conditions have been discharged and that everybody is aligned. So you're minimalizing the possibility of cost and time overruns. But currently, the risk of exit risk is far greater than it's ever been. So in order to have a strategy 2 and strategy 3 in terms of exit becomes more important, because generally speaking, most projects are going to have a little bit of cost and a little bit of time overrun, and that's if it's managed very, very robustly. So there's just a lot more to consider. There's a lot more risk and it's about mitigating the risk. But whoever's driving the project team generally needs to be very, very good.
Michelle, as we're drawing to the end of this podcast, can you delve into your mysterious bag of knowledge and can you give us some tips about what people out there who are engaging in this, before they get into it too far, what things they need to really look for, what they should be beware of, so they try and mitigate this in advance?
So for me, what I'm recommending for anyone that's listening is to create partnerships. So what Dave is saying is he's supporting the people that he's funding to. He's not just standing there and saying, here, have the money. He'll be supporting them, educating them, empowering them, making sure that they are advised in the right way of how to work with their funding. And that's a perfect example. I know one of the companies I'm working with at the moment has just lost £70,000 because they had a bridging loan much longer than they expected to, because they've taken months to sell the house. They've ended up having to reduce the value of the house, or the sale price of the house, to get it sold, because all of a sudden we had a downturn, changing government, whatever it may be, interest rates, so many reasons, but that's a whole other conversation. And I just think some people, you have a tendency either to not employ the right professionals and do your due diligence with a professional, but some people don't employ professionals at all. There is a responsibility for everybody, whatever role you're playing within the project, whether it be the client or the person that's finding, I don't know, laying the tiles. Everyone has a responsibility to make the project work, and everyone is not jointly responsible, but we all have our input, and it's just making sure that everyone's doing the right thing. I mean, obviously the first thing to do is check that as Dave said, you've got all the pre-qualifications, so everything is done that is supposed to be done before you start on site. You've done as much as you can to mitigate, be aware of what your risks are and mitigate many of them. And if you can't mitigate them, come up with various solutions on how to reduce the impact if you can. Having contingency funds is always an issue. Overdrawing on loan facilities is always a no-no. One, because you're paying extra costs on that, but also when you're overdrawing and you're drawing early, then you have a cash flow issue, which then causes problems. Making sure you're keeping an eye on costs all the time. Contingency is a massive thing that people don't really put in projects, because I think it's fine, I'm not going to make any changes, but contingencies aren't just for client changes, therefore economic changes, world changes, war, whatever it may be. You have to have contingencies, and I get 25 or 30%, which is a push, but you have to have a minimum, depending on the size of the project, obviously. But it's keeping an eye on things, and a lot of people just do something, tick a box, and then walk away and don't think about it. You've got to be on the case 24/7 and meeting regularly. And yes, it's frustrating, and feeding back and always checking, making people accountable. There's much more than can be said in sort of a 20-minute podcast of how to do that. But there are ways, but getting the right team, I would always say the right advice is always money well spent. And a decent QS, of course, I'm biased.
Of course, a decent QS. Hamish McClay, would you please take us home?
Well, I think that it goes without saying that you get the right team, you have a significantly better chance of actually sort of meeting closer to your target date for completion of what your project happens to be. I mean, we've got two prime examples here of people who really do know their onions, but it's also an indicator too that it's people like Dave, it's people like Michelle that you want to. And the actual fact, Michelle has just qualified with a master's in something else. What was it? What's this string you've just added to your bow, Michelle?
Oh no, I'm chartered with the CIOB.
Well, I mean, it's not just doing it. I mean, one of the great things, many people actually obtain these qualifications, these letters, but it's what you actually do within that sort of time frame as well. It's not something that just happens. I mean, Michelle's been so involved with the time frame, but congratulations on that. But it does emphasize that particular sort of point, and it makes you wonder sometimes, why the heck do people get involved? Why do people buy into projects? Why do people invest? But if you've got experts like Dave and Michelle on board, as I said, they will actually point you in the right directions and in fact, I know what Michelle will do with her contract, for example. This is what you state in your contract. Don't move from that. She's very good at that side of things. And I'm sure Dave is as well, because he wants to mitigate all challenges as much as can be controlled. Things can go slightly awry. However, if you're working in it professionally, you will actually sort of almost control it.
Well, apparently the contract is a really good thing to make sure people do what they said they're going to do and complete within a sensible time. If only everybody took one up when they started these things up. Thank you, Michelle Carr of Construction Alchemy, Dave Simmons, and thank you of Dev Brock, and of course, Hamish McClare of Search Conveyance. To all of you out there, there is light at the end of the tunnels. Make sure it's not an oncoming train. Until next week, please look after yourselves. Keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and look after that mental health. Bye-bye now.
Okay.